When we think of Genghis Khan, we often picture unstoppable armies thundering across the steppe, cities burning, empires falling.
But what if I told you his greatest legacy wasn't just conquest? It was building a system, an empire, with rules, laws, trade, and even religious freedom.
That's right, Anna. Welcome back to Story Essence Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Anna, and wow, episode 3 is going to blow your minds, everyone.
In this episode, we'll uncover how Genghis Khan turned chaos into order, how he created one of the most efficient systems the medieval world had ever seen, and how his reforms still echo in our modern lives. This isn't your typical history lesson. This is the story of the world's first global empire builder. But before we dive into the empire, let's talk about the man himself. Born around 1162 as Temujin, meaning of iron, he wasn't destined for greatness. His early life reads like a survival story that would make any reality TV show look tame.
Wait, not destined for greatness? This is Genghis Khan we're talking about. What happened in his childhood?
Picture this. When Temujin was just 9 years old, his father was poisoned by rival tribesmen. His family, including his mother and several siblings, were abandoned by their own tribe and left to starve on the harsh steppes. They survived by eating roots, hunting rats, and fishing with crude hooks made from needles.
9 years old and abandoned to starve? That's absolutely brutal. How does a kid survive that kind of trauma?
But here's where it gets even more intense. When Temujin was a teenager, he was captured by a rival tribe and held as a slave, forced to wear a heavy wooden collar called a kang. One night, during a festival when his captors were drunk, he escaped by clubbing a guard with his wooden collar and fleeing into the wilderness.
Okay, now I'm starting to see where that legendary determination came from. But how did he go from escaped slave to uniting the Mongol tribes?
This is where it gets absolutely fascinating. Instead of seeking revenge through random violence, Temujin started building alliances through something revolutionary, loyalty-based relationships rather than blood-based ones. He began gathering outcasts, younger sons who had no inheritance, and anyone willing to earn their place through merit.
So he was basically creating his own chosen family of people who had nothing to lose? That's brilliant strategy.
Exactly. And by 1206, when he was proclaimed Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler, he had united every Mongol tribe through a combination of tactical genius, psychological warfare, and something the steppe had never seen, an actual systematic approach to governance. Every brutal experience from his childhood had taught him lessons about survival, loyalty, and the importance of creating unbreakable systems.
And that transformation from abandoned child to universal ruler is what makes his innovation so remarkable. As we dive into this incredible story, we want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Would you have trusted these revolutionary laws in the 13th century?
Let's start with something that might shock you. Picture this. You're living in the 1200s, and suddenly there's a written constitution that applies to everyone, from the lowest soldier to the Khan himself. This was the Yassa, the law of the steppe.
Wait, hold on. A constitution? In the 1200s? Mark, that's like centuries before most countries even thought about written laws.
Exactly. While Europe was still operating under feudal chaos, Genghis Khan was codifying law across the largest land empire in human history. The Yassa wasn't just rules, it was revolutionary social engineering.
Okay, you've got my attention. What kind of laws are we talking about here?
A strict ban on kidnapping women and selling them into slavery, revolutionary for its time. Severe punishment for theft of horses, livestock, or military supplies, because these were matters of life and death on the steppe. And here's where it gets intense. Military discipline meant desertion, insubordination, or cowardice resulted in immediate execution.
Wow, that's actually protecting people while maintaining order. But Immediate execution? That seems harsh.
It was harsh, but here's the genius part. Everyone knew the rules. There was no favoritism, no corruption. A general's son faced the same consequences as a herder's boy. But get this, the Yassa also regulated loot sharing, so every warrior knew exactly what portion of the spoils they'd receive.
No way. So it wasn't just punishment, it was actually building trust? Even the lowest soldier could rely on getting his fair share?
Absolutely. And here's what really blew my mind. Attacking envoys or merchants was a capital offense. Genghis Khan made diplomacy and trade sacred under law. The Yassa functioned like a constitution, enforcing fairness and discouraging chaos across millions of square miles.
So it wasn't just brute force. He was actually building trust, laws that even the lowest soldier could rely on. That's brilliant state building. Mark, can you give us some specific examples? I mean, how did these laws actually work in practice when you're dealing with millions of people across different cultures?
In 1221, when Mongol forces took the city of Merv in modern-day Turkmenistan, local officials tried to hide valuables from the mandatory inventory process. Under the Yassa, this was considered theft from the empire. The punishment wasn't just for the individuals involved. The entire administrative structure was dismantled and rebuilt with loyal Mongol oversight.
Wow! So it wasn't just about individual punishment. He was reshaping entire governmental structures to ensure compliance?
Absolutely. But here's what's even more impressive. The laws protected people too. There's a recorded case where a Mongol general's son was executed for raping a local woman in conquered territory. The general himself requested the execution, saying the Yassa applied to everyone equally. Compare that to medieval Europe, where nobles could literally get away with murder. Now, let's talk about something that would make modern CEOs weep with envy: Genghis Khan's organizational system. He completely shattered the aristocratic traditions of the steppe with pure meritocracy.
Meritocracy? You mean promotions based on ability, not who your daddy was?
Exactly. Promotions were based on ability, loyalty, and results, not family connections or noble birth. Even humble herdsmen could rise to command hundreds or thousands of warriors. Can you imagine the psychological impact of that? A society where your birth didn't determine your ceiling?
That's incredible. But how do you organize millions of people without chaos? I mean, that sounds like a logistics nightmare.
Here's where Genghis Khan shows his genius: the decimal system of military organization. Arban equals 10 men. Zun equals 100 men. Mingan equals 1,000 men. And 2 men, 10,000 men. Everything was mathematically precise.
Like an early military algorithm. Wait, that's actually brilliant. You could split armies, regroup them, coordinate massive movements.
Exactly. This is why Mongol armies could split, regroup, and still move as if they were one body. It was math, discipline, and vision rolled into one perfect system. Clarity, scalability, and discipline. Imagine trying to coordinate 100,000 warriors without this structure.
Mark, that meritocracy system sounds amazing in theory, but how did it actually work when you're trying to manage warriors from dozens of different tribes with their own traditions and rivalries?
This is where Genghis Khan showed his psychological genius. He deliberately broke up tribal units and mixed warriors from different tribes into the same decimal units. So a 2 men of 10,000 might include Tatars, Merkits, Karaites, and original Mongols all serving together. This forced them to build loyalty to their immediate unit and commanders rather than their old tribal identities.
So he was basically forcing former enemies to become brothers in arms. That's incredibly smart, but also risky. What if they all just turned on him?
That's the genius part. He made rebellion practically impossible through his hostage system. High-ranking officers from conquered tribes had to send their sons to serve in Genghis Khan's personal guard, the Keshik. These weren't just hostages, they were trained as elite warriors and often promoted to important positions if they proved loyal. So betrayal meant sacrificing your own children and your family's future.
That's brilliant. He turned potential rebel leaders into invested stakeholders in the system. Their kids became Mongol elites, so rebellion would destroy their own family's prospects. This is blowing my mind. But Mark, how did he communicate across such vast distances? I mean, we're talking about an empire stretching from Korea to Eastern Europe.
Anna, prepare to have your mind completely blown. Enter the YAM, the postal relay system that was basically medieval Wi-Fi mixed with FedEx.
Medieval Wi-Fi? Okay, you have to explain this.
Picture relay stations with fresh horses positioned across the entire empire. Riders could travel 250 to 300 kilometers per day by switching mounts at each station. This was rapid communication, intelligence gathering, and administration all rolled into one system.
So he basically built a medieval FedEx mixed with Wi-Fi. That's how he kept control over the largest land empire in history.
And it wasn't just for military messages. The YAM carried trade goods, diplomats, and information flow between cultures. It was like an early internet, connecting distant parts of the world in ways that had never been achieved before.
Mark, I need more details about this EM system. How exactly did it work? Like, what did these relay stations actually look like?
Picture this. Every 25 to 30 kilometers, there was a station with fresh horses, food, and sometimes even guides who knew the local terrain. Each station was required to maintain at least 400 horses, and the system employed over 50,000 people across the empire. Riders carried a paisa, essentially a diplomatic passport that guaranteed them resources at any station.
50,000 employees and 400 horses per station? That's like running Amazon logistics in the 13th century. But how did they keep this system funded and operating smoothly?
The system was funded through a combination of tribute from conquered territories, taxes on trade, and corvée labor. Basically, local communities were required to maintain their regional stations in exchange for protection and access to the trade routes. But here's what's brilliant. The system paid for itself. The increased trade volume generated far more tax revenue than the YAM cost to maintain.
Okay, but here's what I'm really curious about. How did he handle the fact that his empire included so many different religions? Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, shamans? That seems like a recipe for religious war.
Anna, this is where Genghis Khan becomes absolutely revolutionary. His empire was a religious mosaic. Muslims, Buddhists, Nestorian Christians, shamans, Taoists, and get this, he imposed no forced conversions.
No forced conversions? In the 13th century? Mark, that's surprisingly progressive.
Absolutely. He followed shamanistic traditions himself, but religious leaders were exempted from taxes and public service. This policy ensured loyalty and reduced rebellion. Meanwhile, in Europe at the same time, people were burning each other at the stake for heresy. Genghis was making freedom of worship a state policy.
Mark, I want to hear some specific examples of this religious tolerance in action, because saying no forced conversions is one thing, but how did it actually work when you had all these different groups living together?
In Karakoram, the Mongol capital, Genghis Khan's successor Ogadai Khan had a palace where Christian priests, Islamic imams, Buddhist monks, and Taoist masters all held regular debates and discussions. William of Rubruck, a Franciscan missionary, wrote about attending these interfaith dialogues where each group was encouraged to explain their beliefs without persecution.
Wait, hold on. Interfaith dialogues in the 1200s? While Europe was burning people as heretics, the Mongols were hosting religious debates? That's unbelievable.
And get this, Genghis Khan's own family exemplified this tolerance. His favorite wife, Borte, likely practiced shamanism, but his daughter-in-law, Sorkaktani, was a devout Nestorian Christian who built churches and funded Christian missions. Meanwhile, some of his generals converted to Islam and others remained Buddhist. The family that conquered half the world was essentially multi-religious.
That's incredible. But what about diplomacy? How did he manage relations with all these different cultures and kingdoms?
Here's where it gets intense. Diplomatic envoys were sacred. Killing an envoy meant certain death for an entire city. Not just the person who did it, the entire city would be destroyed. This made diplomacy literally a matter of life and death for whole populations.
Wow. So he made peace talks genuinely safe for diplomats. That's actually brilliant statecraft. But Mark, let's talk about something huge, trade. How did all this affect commerce?
Anna, this is where Genghis Khan becomes the founder of globalization. The Mongols secured the Silk Road like never before in history. Bandits were hunted down ruthlessly, merchants were protected by imperial decree.
So Genghis Khan was like the founder of globalization before it was even a word? That's mind-blowing.
This created the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, where goods, people, and ideas moved freely across continents. Think about the impact. Gunpowder, printing, and paper money spread from China westward. Medicine, astronomy, and mathematics flowed between Islamic, Indian, and Chinese scholars.
That's incredible. So he connected continents in ways no one had managed before? Wait, is that how Marco Polo's journey became possible?
Exactly. Marco Polo's famous journey was possible thanks to this network. There was a surge in demand for goods, silk, spices, horses, and the infrastructure to move them safely. Genghis Khan literally connected continents and made the first truly global economy possible.
Mark, let's talk economics. How did this Pax Mongolica actually work in terms of trade? What were merchants actually buying and selling across these vast distances?
The variety is mind-blowing. Chinese silk and porcelain moved west, while Islamic glass and Persian carpets went east. But here's what's really fascinating. High-tech knowledge moved too. Chinese papermaking reached the Islamic world in the 1200s after Mongol conquests, and by the 1300s, Europe had paper mills. Islamic astronomical instruments traveled to China. Even playing cards, invented in China, spread to Europe through these trade networks.
So it wasn't just luxury goods. Actual technology was spreading. But how did they handle currency across all these different regions? I mean, Chinese coins, Islamic dinars, European silver.
This is where the Mongols pioneered another world first. They created an international credit system. Merchants could deposit silver in Beijing and withdraw the equivalent value in Baghdad using a system of promissory notes. This was essentially medieval international banking. They also standardized weights and measures across the empire, so a pound of silk meant the same thing in Karakorum as it did in Kiev.
This is fascinating. But I'm curious about something. What was life like for women in Mongol society? Because medieval Europe wasn't exactly known for women's rights.
Anna, prepare to be amazed again. Mongol women had greater rights compared to most medieval societies. They could own property, manage households, and influence politics in ways that would shock European nobles of the time.
Are you serious? They could own property and influence politics? In the Middle Ages, Mongol women had more power than many queens in Europe.
Absolutely. Genghis Khan's daughters often married into allied tribes, but with real political power, not just ceremonial roles. His mother, Holon, and his wife, Borta, remained central figures in the empire, advising on major decisions and managing vast territories.
That's actually incredible. So while European women were considered property, Mongol women were power players in one of history's greatest empires. I want to dive deeper into this women's rights thing, because it sounds almost too progressive to be true for the 13th century. Can you give us some specific examples of Mongol women actually wielding power?
Absolutely. Take Turjin Khatun. She ruled the entire Mongol Empire for 5 years as regent after her husband Ogedai's death. She appointed governors, negotiated with foreign kings, and managed the imperial finances. Or consider Sokok Tani Beki, who controlled the finances for a huge portion of the empire and was so respected that even rival factions sought her counsel. These weren't figureheads, they were actual power brokers.
A woman ruling the entire Mongol Empire for 5 years? That's incredible. Meanwhile, in Europe, women couldn't even inherit property in most places. What made Mongol society so different?
It comes from the nomadic lifestyle itself. In steppe society, survival depended on everyone contributing. Women managed the herds when men were away, made critical decisions about migration routes, and controlled the household finances. Unlike agricultural societies where women could be seen as property, nomadic women were essential economic partners. Genghis Khan simply formalized these existing cultural practices into imperial law. Now, let's talk about something that will make Silicon Valley jealous: cultural exchange and knowledge transfer. When Mongols conquered territories, they didn't just destroy, they collected expertise like precious treasures.
What do you mean, collected expertise? Like, people?
Captured artisans, scholars, and engineers were relocated to serve the empire. Chinese siege engineers, Persian doctors, Islamic astronomers. Knowledge moved both east and west, enriching the entire empire. This wasn't just conquest, it was cross-pollination of civilizations.
So he was basically creating the world's first brain trust, taking the best minds from different cultures and making them work together. That's revolutionary thinking. This brain trust idea is fascinating. Can you give us some specific examples of how this knowledge transfer actually worked? Like, what happened when you put Chinese engineers and Persian doctors in the same place?
Here's a perfect example. Chinese siege engineers working with Islamic metallurgists created improved catapults and early firearms that were far superior to what either culture could produce alone. Persian doctors combined their medical knowledge with Chinese acupuncture techniques. Islamic astronomers used Chinese star charts to create more accurate calendars. It was like a medieval research and development department.
So they were basically creating innovation through cultural fusion? That's incredible. But Mark, what happened to all this progress when the empire eventually fragmented?
That's the remarkable thing. Even when the empire split into different khanates in the late 1200s, the systems continued. The Yuan dynasty in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Golden Horde in Russia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, they all maintained versions of these innovations. The postal systems kept running, trade routes stayed secure, and the knowledge exchanges continued for centuries.
So his systems were so well designed that they outlived political unity? That's the mark of truly revolutionary infrastructure.
And here's something that will blow your mind. Specific innovations we take for granted today can be traced directly to this Mongol knowledge network. The magnetic compass spread from China to Europe through Mongol trade routes. The concept of diplomatic immunity that protects ambassadors worldwide today, that started with Mongol envoy protection laws. Even the idea of a census for taxation and military service. The Mongols were conducting empire-wide population counts in the 1200s.
Wait, so every time I use a compass on my phone, or when diplomats meet safely at the UN, or when governments conduct a census, we're using innovations that trace back to Genghis Khan? That's mind-blowing.
Now, as we wrap up this incredible journey through Genghis Khan's innovations, let's talk about his ultimate legacy. Here's what historian Jack Weatherford argues. Genghis Khan wasn't just a destroyer. He was a builder of systems that outlived him by centuries.
So all these systems, the laws, communication, trade,
tolerance. They kept working even after he died?
The Mongol Empire became the first truly interconnected world. Without it, Europe's later Renaissance and Age of Exploration might have looked completely different. The knowledge exchanges, the trade routes, the diplomatic practices, they all had roots in Genghis Khan's innovations.
It's kind of mind-blowing, Mark. From exile and hunger to inventing a system that tied continents together. This man literally changed how civilizations could interact with each other.
And here's the thing that gives me chills. We still live in a world shaped by his innovations. Global trade networks, diplomatic immunity, meritocratic systems, religious tolerance as state policy, rapid communication across vast distances. Sound familiar?
Wow! Listeners, let us know in the comments which of these innovations surprised you the most. The legal system, the women's rights, the globalization aspect. We want to hear your
And in our next episode, we'll see how his legacy continued after his death, how his descendants expanded the empire, how his innovations spread even further, and how the world we know today still carries Genghis Khan's fingerprints. You won't believe what happened when his empire split into multiple khanates.
Until next time, keep exploring history's incredible stories with us.
This has been Story Essence Podcast, where legends come alive.